Good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to my very first tier list. In it, we're going to be looking at all the factions in Alpha 24 and where I think they sit on a scale, ranking them from top tier, that's number 1, all the way down to 5th tier, that's the bottom. So let's go. So the introduction of Alpha 24 has meant that a lot of the things about how good a faction is has just actually been turned completely on their head. For example, slingers, spears and rams, well, that's no longer the unstoppable force that it was in Alpha 23, while archers having increased attack and accuracy has seen them from going, well, basically they were a liability and now they're quite the asset. So how does this impact all the factions' positions on the tier list? Well, in order to do that, we're really going to have to look at what I thought happened in Alpha 23, and then we can have a look and see how they've moved with Alpha 24's introduction. So here's Alpha 23's list. So as you can see, the top tier factions are those guys like the Britons, Gauls, basically the Celtic factions were just outstanding, and also the Ptolemies, who were more difficult to use but were just a brilliant faction when you really weren't how to play with them. In the second tier, we have the Romans, the Seleucids and the Spartans, who were all very good options. In the middle, the Persians, the Iberians and the Athenians. Then going down, we've got the Mauryans, who had some positives but were pretty rubbish. The Macedonians, who just kind of, well, they had the siege workshop but very little else that really made them jump out. And at the bottom, you had the Kushites and the Carthaginians, who were just best avoided. Now, a quick shout out before we get into the meat of the video, and that is if you would like this tier list to be the theme of the next Tom0AD livestream on 2nd of April 2021, then please answer the poll on my community pages. As I record this, it's been live for about 15 minutes and this option is losing. So if you want to change that, then get out and make your voice heard by voting. But enough of that. Let's now look at how these same factions that we looked at in Alpha 23 and that previous tier list stack up against one another in Alpha 24. Just before we do, though, it's important to remember that due to changes in the game mechanics overall, just like in a football transfer window, staying still can actually mean going backwards as your adversaries progress at your expense. So, with that caveat out of the way, let's check out the factions of Alpha 24. First up is the Athenians, and they have lost their town phase champion at the Royal Star, and that's a huge loss and it really hurts them. However, they have gained a ram, and they still have one of the top champions in the game in Iphicrates. Therefore, I'm going to keep them in the middle range, and tier 3 it is for them. So both Celtic factions have taken a nosedive as their supplementary buildings no longer afford population cap bonuses. However, the Britons still have their slingers, and the moving of dogs from kennels to the cavalry stables in phase 1 is definitely a boost. So they're going to drop a level to 2nd tier, but they remain a decent faction choice, especially for beginners. The Carthaginians are a strange case. The boosting of archers and the addition of a ram means they've improved in some aspects on Alpha 23, but on the flip side their elephant has been weakened, and as they've an army mostly composed of mercenaries, it's harder to collect resources and to have a fight at the same time. That said, the archer buff is going to move them from the bottom tier up to the 4th tier. The Gauls face similar struggles to the Britons, but they're worse off. They don't start with slingers, they don't have dogs, but they're going to be hit by all the same losses. Now, they do have an improvement in their phase 2 sword cavalry, but that's little consolation. So Gauls are one of the big losers, all the way down from the top tier to tier 4 for Asterix's boys. The Iberian walls are less useful in Alpha 24, and that's due to the difficulty in raiding, but they do still give you a strong boom if they're used very well. So other than that, little has changed, but the flaming spear cavalry have actually become massively improved. So they've got a slight improvement, but I don't think it's enough to see them change from being a tier 3 prospect. And so we reach the first of our big movers upwards. They're up from the bottom tier, and they're the Kushites, because they've had the biggest overhaul of all the factions, and boy are they improved for it. They have rams, they have archery tradition, they have mercenary camps you can build outside your territory. It is all go. So the only thing really is that if it wasn't for the elephant being of the weaker African variety, they'd be right at the top. But sadly, their elephants just can't compete with the Indian ones. So the Kingdom of Kush ends up in the 2nd tier. The Macedonians are another faction with little in the way of changes. The new crossbowmen they have is a nice addition, but their reliance on mercenary really brings them down. And as all the other factions now have siege workshops, I'm not even really sure what their USP is. Therefore, they find themselves dropping down to the bottom tier. And so we come to another big winner from the changes, and that's Mauria. There's no more floating around near the bottom for them. Their population bonus is intact, so you still get 10% more soldiers, and with it they have super strong Indian elephants, they have archery tradition, and they have the mobile drop site of the worker elephant. They're quite simply now Alpha 24's top faction by quite some way. And joining Mauria in that top tier, although they are slightly worse, are the Persians. And they're basically in the top tier for the same reasons. Archers? Check. Indian elephants? Check. 10% population bonus? Check. So, okay, they don't have the mobile drop site, and they have slightly reduced champion options when compared to Mauria, but other than that, they're a match for the Maurians, and really there's nowhere else but the top tier to put them. The Ptolemies have had a mixed Alpha 23 to Alpha 24 transition, and they're certainly not the fearsome faction that they once were. Gone are the free houses, storehouses, and farmsteads, and also their Phase 1 mercenary skirmisher is a thing of the past. They're all huge losses that the introduction of a ram just doesn't compensate them for. So they're still also rather susceptible to rams of your opponents, but they have few of the positive factors that outweigh this, so it's a drop from the top to level 3 for the Ptolemies. And now to Asterix's nemesis, the Romans, and they were one of my favourite factions in Alpha 23. But what's happened to them? They've got no archers, they've got no slingers, the army camp no longer produces siege weapons. Basically, they're going to be super susceptible to any kind of range faction, and they have little chance of stopping them until Phase 3. Not even the Phase 1 Lancers saves them for me. Get yourselves down to the bottom tier, I'm afraid to say. Seleucids are one of the other factions that remains quite constant. Yeah, they rely on mercenaries, but that's their only real negative. They have the full range of troops available, and also the military colony and Indian elephants, along with their excellent champion choices, I think put them just below the very best tiered factions. So they keep themselves at tier 2. For the Spartans, I'll start with a positive. They've got rid of their 10% reduction in population size, so that's good. But nothing else is good for them, I'm afraid. Like the Romans, they have no archers or slingers. Like the Athenians, they've lost the royal stoa. And on top of that, their champion options are horribly limited. For instance, there's no cavalry. So, therefore, unless you can get a strong Phase 2 push, you're in massive trouble. Make your way down to the bottom tier. I dread to think what Gerard Butler thinks of what's happened to his favourite faction.
Now that's a bit of a problem.
And that's that for the Alpha 24 tier list. Admittedly, it's still quite early in Alpha 24's life, so there is the potential that some innovative game-changing new strategy may make one of the factions move up or down as we discover a little more about the game. But for now, I'll be settling on that as my opinion. So let me know your thoughts in the comments and, like, subscribe, ring the bell and do all that kind of thing. And that will help you to find out more and also be kept up to date and help you to contribute to my monthly 0 AD live streams. Obrigado e adeus.